So in this video, we're going to talk about Edgar Wright's movie, Shaun of the Dead. Now, this is the first of a trilogy of movies, the Three Flavours Cornetto Trilogy, which includes Hot Fuzz and The World's End. They're all quite different movies, however. Shaun of the Dead is a zombie horror comedy starring Simon Pegg and Nick Frost as two friends and roommates, Shaun and Ed, respectively. Shaun is in a kind of dead-end retail job. He has a girlfriend named Liz, played by Kate Ashfield. He is not thrilled with the fact that Shaun and Ed, in a way, kind of live like... So there's Ed is a slacker. We'll put it that way, pretty straight out. They kind of live the way that students, like college students, university students, live, right? There are three of them living in the house. Pete is their third roommate. He seems to be a much more sort of responsible adult. He has a better paying, more professional job. He has a better car, etc., etc. Shaun seems to be reasonably happy with his retail job, even though it's not particularly dignified. He doesn't particularly like it. He's happy with his relationship with Liz, even though it's not really, like, it's not going anywhere. It's not moving toward marriage necessarily. It's just he's comfortable with it. And then Ed sells a little bit of pot, but not really. But mostly he just hangs around the house, plays video games, and drinks. And then what they do for fun is they go to the Winchester, which is their local pub. This is actually apparently based on the real-life relationship of Pegg and Frost, who, at least for a time, were roommates, and they were in this very, like, just comfortable rut where they were just going to this same local pub continually, and Peg's girlfriend at the time just hated the fact that this was all that they wanted to do. And so we get that with Liz. She wants Shaun to do more stuff. She wants him to take her to fancy restaurants, go on vacations, whatever it is. And he doesn't want to do any of that stuff. So that's the sort of emotional backstory of this. The emotional conflict is that Shaun is in this very familiar routine. Liz wants him to get out of it, and because he won't or can't, she does break up with him early in the film. Shaun and Ed respond by getting very, very drunk. And Pete continues his general process of berating them when they wake him up with very loud music at like 3 a.m. So that's all going on. While that is happening, we have the start of a zombie plague. Through sort of overheard news presentations and things, we get the background impression that, I forget exactly what it is. Something like a satellite has exploded over the UK, and so that's like zombified the recently deceased. So Shaun and Ed, when they wake up the next morning after they've gotten significantly drunk, they find this girl in the garden who turned out to be a zombie, and it takes them quite a while to realize that she is a zombie. Like, she's literally trying to bite Shaun, and they're, like, beating her and she's just not responding before they finally figure out, okay, this is something weird going on. So they realize, or they come to realize, but partially by watching the news, that this is some kind of zombie apocalypse. So Shaun says, all right, we need to go. We need to get Liz and her roommates, Diane and David. We need to get Shaun's mom, Barbara, and Phillip, her new husband. Phillip, who has actually been bitten by one of the zombies. So the plan is actually to go get Liz. They don't necessarily care about Diane and David, but at least get Liz, get Barbara, kill Phillip because he's going to become a zombie, and then go to the Winchester, which Simon reasons will be safe. His reasoning for this is partially just, this is a comfortable, familiar space, but he makes some reasonably good arguments about, like, the doors lock, there's food, there's drinks there, etc., etc. So that's the plan. They have some difficulties of various kinds in getting to the Winchester. Basically, they just they go through, they have to kill a number of zombies, etc., etc. Incidentally, these are the slow-moving zombies of, like, George Romero style, rather than the sort of fast-moving zombies of some more modern zombie movies. So, at one point, they are, for instance, able to fool the other zombies by just sort of walking slowly and moaning. So, this is, and then ultimately at the end, actually, everybody else in the group, Barbara gets bitten and they have to kill her. Phillip turns into a zombie. They end up locking him in his car. Pete gets zombified pretty early on. Diane and David get ripped apart. Finally, it's Shaun, Ed, and Liz, the last three in the Winchester. Ed gets bitten, so he's going to die. Shaun and Liz decide they're going to basically try and escape and fight their way through the last bit of zombies, at which point the military shows up and basically rescues them. And then the movie ends with Shaun and Liz living together in the house that Shaun, Ed, and Pete had lived in before, and just sort of living a quiet, chilled-out life, with Ed zombified, living in the shed in the backyard, because apparently the zombies, their relative complacence and lack of desire for workers' rights makes them ideal retail workers and things like that. So that's sort of the upshot of it. Now, the thing that I think is really, really, really interesting about this is that this is possibly one of the most British movies I've ever seen. And what I mean by that is a very specific sort of cultural attitude that seems to be associated with the British. This is obviously not true of all British people, but one sort of prevailing cultural element that seems to be very strongly associated with the British is this desire for routine and for a sort of quiet life. So you watch something like Very British Problems, which is a program just about sort of the cultural life of the British, or you read the Very British Problems. Originally, I think it started as a Twitter feed, and then it was made into books and the TV show and things like this. One of the things that sort of pervades this, and you see this in British comedy as well, you see this in British sitcoms, things like this, is the sense that, like, any sort of disruption of routine is bad. Things should be familiar, things should be comfortable, don't make changes. Like, you go to the same restaurant, even if you don't really like the food, because that is what you do. It's just that routine. You go to the same place on vacation, even if it's a sort of crappy caravan park where it rains all the time. You go to that place because that is the place you've always gone for vacation. This seems to be a sort of big recurring cultural element in British comedy, sitcoms, media, etc., etc. Um, and so this is the central problem, in a way, of Shaun of the Dead, right? Shaun is in that comfortable space. He does not want to change. He wants that routine where everything is familiar, everything is straightforward. Liz pushes him to change. And this, in a way, sort of signals the break of the movie, right? The break from, all right, things are familiar and comfortable, very properly British, to now we're in this bizarre space of the zombie plague, zombie apocalypse. Um, while there clearly isn't a causal link between those two things. There is not an outbreak of zombieism because Liz pushes Shaun to change, but the two things align in the movie. It is the morning after she breaks up with him that the zombie plague really becomes an issue. So there is this sense that there's this sort of textural sense in the film that when you make changes to your routine, there are negative consequences. It is an endorsement of the British preference for everything remaining the same, even if that status quo is not particularly desirable. But there's more. The zombie is a really interesting monster in this context, right? Because this film is certainly not the first film theory, reading, understanding, whatever it is, to align zombies with capitalism. And this happens on a number of different levels. In Shaun of the Dead, the alignment is with workers, right? Because at the end of the film, early on in the film, we have depictions of people working, and they are just very like mindless, like scanning items or whatever it is. And then at the end of the film, right, we again get this sort of information through overheard news broadcasts in which zombies are being put to work in sort of retail positions, stocking shelves and gathering carts or trolleys, as they call them in the UK. These kinds of positions, because they are compliant and these are low critical thinking type occupations, that's problematic in itself, but they're often thought of that way. So there is this alignment of workers and zombies within the film. And that is one common connection made between the world of capitalism and the zombie as such. There's also the zombie consumer trope in which people consume and consume and consume and consume. We keep buying more stuff, even if we don't need it, in this sort of endless, mindless cycle of consumption. But there's also a sort of larger meta analysis in which capitalism itself is zombie-like. The push for infinite growth, infinite economic growth. We have to sell more than we did last quarter, etc., etc. All of these kinds of things, this sort of mindless, continual desire to produce more, sell more, make more money, increase profits, etc., etc. So there's definitely that element of the critique of capitalism here. This is very common in zombie movies, again, as I said. But what I think makes this one more interesting is we think about Shaun of the Dead as a film about the virtues of inertia, right? The virtues of routine and staying in place, doing the thing that is familiar. We have here an interesting element to the zombie as a figure, because on the one hand, the zombie is not inert. The zombie, one of the things that characterizes the zombie in horror is the continual drive to consume. The zombie always continues moving. They always are looking for food, for someone to spread the disease of zombieism to, etc., etc. But at the same time, they do nothing else. So this is this thing where, like, you continue doing the thing that you are doing. You do not vary your routine, but you keep going on with it. In a way, Shaun and Ed were already zombies. They lived this stable, continual life where things did not change. They did not vary their routine. They did what they did in the same way that zombies go on and on and on eating. They go on and on infecting people. They have nothing. They do nothing else. There is no variation to their routine. Even though the specific sort of element, like who they're pursuing or whatever it is, may change, the fundamental aspect of the zombie is routine. It is a sort of low-level, drive-based existence in the psychological, psychoanalytic conception of drive. And that is what Shaun fundamentally wants throughout the movie, is just to be comfortable in the spaces where he is already familiar with. And what's interesting, ultimately, is that the film kind of endorses this. And again, this is why I say this is such a British movie. The film kind of endorses this position of the zombie, ultimately. The zombie is, while it is a terrifying figure to some degree, I mean, this isn't horror, this is horror comedy, but, I mean, the zombies do rip people apart, they do eat people, etc., etc. But ultimately, the basic impulse of the zombie, to remain within a routine, to not deviate, to not be spontaneous, to not change, this is endorsed by the film, because the happy ending of the film is Shaun and Liz sitting on the couch. They're going to eat pizza and crisps, potato chips in the US. They're going to eat pizza and crisps. They're going to go to the Winchester. Shaun is going to go out into the shed. He's going to play the same video games with Ed that they had played at the beginning of the movie. Fundamentally, their life has gone back to normal. And that is endorsed as the happy ending of the film. So, in this sense, the zombies were right.